Good afternoon and welcome to the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus webinar. Today's webinar is the first installment of the Caucus's Great Lakes Great Webinar Series in 2015. I'm Lisa Hanaira with the Council of State Government's Midwestern Office. I staff the caucus and am managing the logistics for today's webinar. We'll hear right at the start about nutrient runoff in the Great Lakes, a basin-wide problem. Following the presentation, we'll hear from Great Lakes Legislative Caucus Chair Representative Corey Mason from Wisconsin about the caucus and about some of the activities and priorities in 2015. We'll start with a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded. The slides from the presentation and the recording will be posted on the GLLC website today at the address you see on the screen. The recording will also be available on CSG Midwest's YouTube channel. To reduce the possibility of feedback or other external noise, the conference will be in listen-only mode. After the presentation, we'll open up the line for questions. If you have a question, please let me know either by typing your question in the GoToWebinar Questions pane or by clicking on the hand icon to raise your hand. If you accidentally click on the button to raise your hand, just click it again and it'll turn off. Here's an image of what the control panel looks like. And it shows the questions pane and the hand icon and also the options for telephone and mic and speakers. To reduce the size of this window on your screen, just click the orange button that's got the white arrow on it and it'll toggle back and forth. If you're using your telephone, please make sure to enter your audio PIN, which you'll find in this audio pane right here. And if you're using your computer's microphone and speakers, please test your settings by clicking on the settings link. Your connection to the webinar audience will be muted, so don't worry about anyone hearing you as you test your microphone. If your microphone doesn't appear to be working and you do want to be able to speak, you should call in using one of the telephone numbers listed here and make sure to enter your PIN when you do. And now I'll turn the floor over to the Chair of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, Wisconsin Representative Corey Mason.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to be focusing this afternoon on one of the most serious threats to the Great Lakes, the problem of nutrient runoff and the negative impact that it can have on Great Lakes tributaries and the lakes themselves. Last year, when the city of Toledo temporarily lost access to its drinking water due to a harmful algal bloom in Lake Erie, it was a dramatic reminder to the entire Great Lakes region about the need to address this source of pollution. To help us explore this issue and a potential policy solution, I am pleased to introduce Lana Pollack as our guest speaker. Ms. Pollack serves as the chair of the U.S. section of the International Joint Commission. The IJC helps to prevent and resolve disputes between the U.S. and Canada over shared water resources, including the Great Lakes. Its mission includes cross-border implementation of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Two of the primary goals of this agreement are to reduce phosphorus levels and prevent harmful algae blooms in the Great Lakes. The IJC also released a groundbreaking study in 2014 outlining policy strategies for preventing nutrient pollution. Links to this study and to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement are available on the Caucus's website, along with other information related to today's webinar. Ms. Pollack has served as the U.S. Section Chair of the IJC since 2010, when she was appointed to the position by President Obama. Her diverse background includes an 8-year stint as President of the Michigan Environmental Council and nearly a decade of service in the Michigan Senate. During her time as a state legislator, Ms. Pollack was the author of Michigan's landmark polluter pay law. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Pollack. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Representative Mason. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's good to be back in the company of so many legislators. As you've mentioned, I've had 12 years experience walking in your shoes. I know the pressures and I know the excitement and the opportunities as well. And I think that the challenge of the Great Lakes with the algal blooms and the nutrient runoffs that we're going to address today is an opportunity and certainly as well as being a challenge. Let me just start very quickly with a reference to the International Joint Commission, which was established in 1909 with a treaty signed by Canada and the United States. and recognize that of the boundary waters that we share, that's 43% of the boundary between Canada and the United States, and you're seeing several different basins is water, and even among the best of friends, that leaves a room for discussion. And of course, the Great Lakes is the largest basin of all, the one we're concerned about here today, and one that, like all other basins, requires the cooperation and the protection by the peoples and the governments, both provincial, state, and certainly federal, on both sides of the border. The IJC is not a regulatory agency, except in the case where, as it says under the title on this, that we have the jurisdiction over water flows where there's a dam that's built. When it comes to water quality, we are advisory. But if you go over the 105-year history of the IJC, we have had some influential reports that have been written, and we'll get into detail on what we're calling our LEAP report, Lake Erie Ecosystem Priority Report. Let me just stop and say, too, that as you see at the bottom of this slide, while the Treaty of 1909 is primarily a treaty addressing water flow, water sharing, and in the West, we're aware that people there have different water issues because of water allocation and the lack of water. Ours in the East has been different. Water flow, water quantity issues. There is one clause there that says that the waters herein defined as boundary waters and waters flowing across the boundary shall not be polluted on either side to the injury of health or property on the other, making a commitment by each country not to pollute the waters on the other side. But we know that perfection has eluded us in both countries, and that pollution has been a recurring problem. What you're looking at on the left-hand screen there is a picture that set both countries in motion when that was on the cover of Life magazine in the 60s. But frankly, those that burning fire from sludge and oil on the Cuyahoga River and several other rivers, tributaries right at the mouths of the Great Lakes, they've been bursting into flames a long time. This was not the first time. So you can look on the right-hand side, and if you look at the width of the man's tie, you'll know that was not a 1960s hippie protesting the dirty water. That the concerns on Lake Erie and other lakes go way back. But with the I would say the social revolution of the early 60s, the public became very disgusted and intolerant of the kind of pollution that they'd been accepting in the decades before. The two governments asked the IJC to do a study, and particularly on Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and particularly on water quality being compounded by phosphates, and so an agreement was reached between the two countries. Now, that Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement signed by Trudeau and Nixon in 1972, it's not enforceable. It's not an enforceable treaty and an enforceable agreement, but it's commitment. And that commitment on both sides of the border drove a lot of legislation, the Clean Water Act and the National Environmental Protection Act on our side, and other the Safe Drinking Water Act. Within a few years, there was a whole architecture of protections in law in both countries. Now, the Water Quality Agreement has been revised in 1978, 87, and most recently in 2012. I'm just showing this, even though it's not, it doesn't show nutrient loading, and that's the main topic that we're looking at today. But I really think it's important to remind ourselves as legislators and people concerned about the lake that governments can have success, that our actions and investments and regulations and protections do result in safer water. When we get the legislation right, the outcomes are better. So what you're seeing here, you just look at the downward slope, and that's the direction you want it to go. You're looking at PCBs and dioxin levels in herring gull eggs, but we could have put up any number of other slides. And it shows that the results of those laws that I've mentioned had an impact, a positive impact. And in many ways, lakes that were declared dead and harmed and dying and what have you were cited, frankly, worldwide as success stories. But success in the lakes is not permanent without continual care. So now if we go to the agreement that was many years in coming, in that agreement that was signed in 2012, not by the presidents, but here you see a picture of the head of EPA and the Minister of Environment in the Stephen Harper's government in Canada. And there are several improvements in this. It's really a wonderful agreement. The improvements, I think, are largely, I'm going to say, administrative. It doesn't get measured. It doesn't have accountability. Really often, as we know, can be just words on a page. This has a governing board, a binational governing board. The acronym is Great Lakes Executive Committee. Everything is binational. So every committee, every effort has a Canadian and a U.S. Individual paired. There are 10 annexes at various subject areas, and later you'll see a live link to some of these things, and you'll want to look at this. But it's the annexes that one is specific to nutrients, and each annex has a committee, and they meet regularly, and then all of the committees meet twice a year and report out to each other. And so we're hopeful that this 2012 agreement will be more than just promises, and we'll see success like we saw in the earlier, in fact, the first two agreements. Okay, so you may have seen this before. It's an ugly picture. It really is. Unless it were a finger painting by a child, and it's not. It's an ugly picture. Look up in the upper, at the top, kind of to the left. That's Lake St. Clair, and you can see the river going through. You can see that the green, the algal blooms, don't just start in Lake Erie. You can also see the Western Basin, and then the dark, much more blue, less green. That's the hypoxic area, the dead zone that is returned, and I will refer to that later. But you can see the massive size of these algal blooms. So clearly, our success was not permanent. I point out here, this is not a smoothie, that phosphorus is the key nutrient that limits the amount of algae in the lake. So if you can limit phosphorus, you will limit the amount of algae. There are other factors. We'll talk about it. Frankly, the one that we can control, that can be controlled, is phosphorus. And once again, controlling the phosphorus in these situations will be the control on Lake Erie. Now, I want to say, I know that we have people here that are not just from Ohio and Michigan, the bounding Lake Erie. But you well know, which is, I assume while you're on the phone, there's problems in all the lakes, and the Saginaw Bay and Green Bay in particular. Go further west into Canada, Lake Winnipeg, which is of course not a Great Lake, has problems equally bad to Lake Erie. So wherever you are on the Great Lakes, you've got some measure of problems with this stuff, and some of it is substantial. Let's pause on this slide. This bar graph shows how much phosphorus is in the lake. It's Lake Erie in this case again. So if you look on the left, starting in 57, you can see the bars are very high, and there's metric tons. So you're up over 25, almost to 30,000 metric tons of phosphorus being loaded into Lake Erie every year. Now you look over to the right, and it's clearly gone down. But if we toggle back to this, the phosphorus went down, but the algae came back. So what's going on here? So let's look at this in a little more detail. At the very beginning, the first several years there, they didn't differentiate. They didn't have the science. We didn't have the monitoring. We didn't differentiate where that phosphorus is coming from. But with the colored bars, you can see that we do. So if you look at the very bottom, you have that kind of light robin's egg blue, and that's the direct point source. That means mostly that represents the phosphorus coming out of inadequate wastewater treatment plants. One of the things that happened in the 60s, 70s, mainly in the 70s, is that both governments put effectively billions of dollars in today's dollars into modern wastewater treatment plants, which are now aging. And they really took care of a substantial amount of it. They also banned, or almost banned, they required the substantial reduction in phosphates in our washing and our detergents that go in our washing machines. So those things made a difference, and you can see that the source pollution is way down. But you can see something's wrong, because we wouldn't have the problems we have. So look at the brighter, darker blue there, and that's representing non-point source pollution. Some of the non-point source pollution can be washed off urban areas, but most of it is rural, and most of the rural is agriculture. So we want to pause here to also to call to attention that what acted as adequate controls to reduce the algal blooms in the 70s, 80s, and 90s no longer works. Once again, recall the slide with all the algal blooms and all the problems that we're currently having. So what has changed? Well, climate has changed. This is just one more manifestation of how climate change works its way into virtually everything we consider these days. There's warmer waters that's more friendly to the algae. There's more frequent, intense storm events, and it's the intensity of the events that washes any phosphate that's not really taken up by the plants. It washes it right into the waterways, and so it's a delivery system. Those intense storm events. The aquatic invasive species, especially the mussels, zebra quagga mussels, they have an impact on this. And then, of course, there's changing farming practices. And frankly, at this point, that's the only one we have much short-term hope of implementing any modifications that can make a difference. I point out here, too, that we're looking today, the scientists today are looking at something called dissolved reactive phosphorus, which is the kind of form of phosphorus that's very available to the plants. They just love it. You know, the algal blooms just slurp it right up. You can see that the blue lines, it went down and now it's going up. And if you lay that on top of the images of the algal blooms returning, it's a good match. So we're looking at a problem of dissolved reactive phosphorus. And I'll just say this. In the earlier days when we were looking at total phosphorus, the main challenge was to keep the soil on the ground to avoid reduce erosion, soil erosion, because we felt, and it's true, the phosphorus was attached to the soil and traveled with the soil into the water. This is where the storm events and phosphorus that's applied on frozen ground, snowy ground, just before a big rainfall. The soil can stay right where it is, but the dissolved reactive phosphorus runs into the rivers, in this case the Maumee River, and then into the lake. Let's take a look here just at this again is Lake Erie, and you can see the large orange, the larger the orange arrow, the more phosphorus is in that, the heavier the load that's coming through that. So the biggest one there is the Maumee River. But you can also see stuff coming down from Lake St. Clair through the Detroit River, and there is some loading that is occurring from the Detroit wastewater treatment plant that is much better than it was 2 years ago, but not good enough. But this shows a number of other sources in Canada, other rivers flowing through and depositing that. Okay, so this you can read with me. Agriculture is the main source. More than 66% of the phosphorus comes from agriculture and other rural non-point sources. So of all the phosphorus in Lake Erie, and this is not exactly true of every other lake, but it's largely true. The same large picture is painted in all of it. It's an ag problem that we're facing today, and that's good science, and we might wish it were otherwise, politically and economically, but it is what it is, and there's no use trying to fix the lakes by fooling ourselves as to what it is. So in Ohio, our research shows that actually, although there are CAFOs, and we hear a lot about it, and sometimes CAFOs create all sorts of problems, in terms of the phosphate problem, yes, it's a major contributor, but not as much as the row crops, which that represents mostly chemical fertilizers as opposed to the manure. And the main problem is from March to June 30th. Fertilizer that's put on the ground in those periods is intense rains is likely to fertilize the algal blooms and only partially be taken up by the plants that they're trying to fertilize. Their non-agricultural sources, about 16%, mostly the wastewater treatment plants. And then the other pathways I've mentioned before, it's flowing in from Lake Huron and also from atmospheric deposition. But, of course, a lot of that comes from ag, too. So mainly upstream ag, but it's not direct into Lake Erie. Are we succeeding? No. I mean, it's awful. We had 500,000 people. Some of those were in Canada, too. Lake Pelee Island was without water for the same reasons, and some other areas at different times. Just want to pause to say, as legislators, and we're going to get to what you might think of doing, think of this in terms of source water, keeping the source water protected. In other words, keeping the excess phosphorus, the nutrients, out of the water. And then there's the drinking water problem, because when the problem hit Toledo, they didn't have a system, and most systems don't clean out the cyanotoxins. So there's a lot of pressure. At the bottom of the slide, you see the EPA and Environment Canada are going to release loading objections for phosphorus. That'll address the source water problems. Now, that's not going to be enforceable. Those are not regulations, but they're going to say above this is unacceptable because of the conditions it will create. And then EPA and the U.S. side, federal legislation have been proposed, not passed, that will at least set a health-based guideline for cyanotoxins, because when Toledo got hit, the local people were trying to say, well, what's the safety measure? You know, when do we let people drink the water again? And there is no national standard for that. So there will be a national, at least, guidelines coming out this spring, but again, not enforceable, but at least there'll be some guidelines soon. All right, it's not just about drinking water. If you're a legislator with a district that bounds the water, your algal blooms are hitting your tourism, fishing, wildlife, pet protection, fishing, food sources, all of these things, the property values, and certainly human health. On the economic side of it, we, the IJC, are going to put out a second report. It's called the second Leap 2, probably by the end of 2015, and that'll focus much more deeply on the economic costs that's imposed by not controlling the phosphates, the algal blooms, and the outcomes, as well as better information on human health impacts. Here's some findings. How much do you have to reduce it? On the right, by the way, is a picture of the report that's been mentioned. There'll be a link to that report with this slide deck. Again, it looks like a beautiful picture, but it's really an ugly picture. If you're a charter boat or a recreational fisherman trying to get through that water, as that little boat shows, tough, tough, tough. We need about a 40% reduction in the phosphorus reaching the lake in the western Lake Erie Basin to really get to a much milder bloom situation, or maybe no blooms, like it was 15 years ago. So to go back to the good years, that's how much you need to, and to really reduce the hypoxic, this dead zone in the middle, to no more than 10 days and no more than 800 square miles, you have to also reduce it by about 40%. So these have to be substantial changes, and just a few more farmers doing a few more things with a few more best management practices is not going to cut it. We talk about incentive-based programs. You really have to focus on what they're putting on the ground either in the winter or whatever's there between March and June. That's when it's delivering it to the lakes. The toxic algal blooms may not be really heavy until August, but they're getting their head start. They're getting their food source between March and June primarily. We need to look at where the loadings really happen. Look at priority watersheds. Remember that slide I showed with the orange arrows. Again, a few more efforts, a little more of what we've been doing is not going to work, and there'll be other cities losing their water, property values, and all the other issues unless something substantially different is done. Also, the protection, and we'll go over this just briefly again, the protection and restoration of natural lands. So wetlands and just not farming right up to the edge of the water, green infrastructure, all very important. The IJC, which is frankly a pretty conservative group of people, mostly, just said that in our report, in the LEAP report, look at voluntary actions have not worked, they will not work, they will not be sufficient, and unless there's some regulatory protections involved, and this is something that the states can do or the feds could do, you're going to have recurring instances like we had in Toledo. So we need to ban application on frozen ground or snow-covered ground. Ohio actually has had some legislation that also that has been under consideration that actually adds a few more elements to that, including heavy rains. Mandatory certification of standards for applicators. Ohio has passed that, although they have not implemented it fully yet. And then the new Farm Bill did link crop production insurance with conservation performance, so that the feds that underwrite the all-important cost of crop production insurance say that they are now going to look at the practices, and if farmers do a better job with best management practices, they'll get a better discount on their crop insurance. We need more monitoring. There used to be a lot more monitoring in the 70s, and then the government said, hey, we fixed that. We don't need to spend so much money on monitoring. So that brought up questions, and people argue, oh, it's really the Detroit River outlet. Well, is it? To what degree? You put some monitoring down there, we'll know where to spend the bigger money on fixing things. You'll understand where the sources are better. We need improved modeling. We need to address the open lake dredging, the influence of climate change, and also some states, Michigan has taken some action. People put a lot more fertilizer on the ground than they need in their lawn care. And virtually no state or province has adequate inspection of septic systems. So that the septic systems that are old, you're getting human waste in there. There's some counties have some requirements that point at the time you sell, you have to at least inspect it as one of the requirements before selling your property. And once again, green infrastructure. The IJC is asking for at least a 10% increase in wetlands. Okay, so a message to the elected officials. Voluntary programs are not protecting Lake Erie and other waters. They're just not, and there's no reason to believe that they are. When I listen to the people representing the agriculture community in both Michigan and Ohio, they each have programs. They each have voluntary programs. They're a little different, but they each make contributions. But I believe I'm right in hearing that the last time I heard, in each state there were less than 4% of the farmers who had signed up for this. That's 96%. And they said, well, we're going to get it. Well, in what, another 20 years? And, you know, voluntary is nice, but if it's not working, it's not working. We need to ban fertilizer on snow-covered ground and frozen ground. We need to establish targets for phosphorus loading. That's coming, not enforceable, but at least targets. More monitoring, less phosphorus on lawns, septic system inspection should be mandatory unless you want human waste with your kids at your public beaches. Stormwater runoff control, rain gardens, rain barrels, all sorts of things that many of you are familiar with, and the wetlands, the protective wetlands. So that's what I have to offer now. That's a live link on this last slide to the LEAP report, and it's a good report. There's a lot of science, and there's a lot more on the IJC website as well. So with that, let me ask Lisa, our moderator, if you want to have me answer any questions. I'd be happy to try and do that for a few minutes.
Thank you, Lana. We do have a couple of questions. I'm going to see first, Senator Janet Bewley has her hand raised. Senator Bewley, if you have a question, I'm opening up your line right now. Senator Bewley, if your computer's microphone isn't working, you'll have to call in to ask your question, or you can type it. In the meantime, we'll go to, we did have a question, Lana. Can you go back to the slide that showed agriculture with the percentages? I think it preceded the Toledo Blade headline page.
Yeah. You're breaking up, but let me go back. Tell me when to stop. Right there? That one?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if I'm saying verbally, but okay, I'll try in here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know why my line's breaking up, but the question is, what are these percentages based on?
The IJC used and consulted a number of scientific studies that were peer-reviewed and have been published in scientific journals. We didn't to the LEAP report, you will see the footnotes, the details of the sources of this information. It's not one individual science. It's the aggregate of and the considered judgment that we reached by working with, I think there were 200 different scientists involved, if I recall. But the report, the LEAP report, again on our website, will give you the more detail on that.
Okay, and I guess for a follow-up on that, the reason for the question is because apparently there is concern by some that the studies used were based on outdated animal numbers. You mentioned that it's not CAFOs that are the posing the greatest hazard. So the question, I guess, is, are there recent data to indicate that it's the row crops and not manure?
We use the most recent data we have. Now, you note that that's just that has got Ohio in parentheses. So, of course, it could be different in Michigan. And again, more detail and more extensive information is in the report. I know that we always are interested in if there's updated material or information. This is an ongoing dynamic study. I feel confident that the science here is good, but science is itself a moving target. If not, it's not science. So any new data, any new peer-reviewed data, any more information that is acquired with more monitoring, more gauges, that's one of the things that we call for, because we really need to refine this information. There's no doubt that we need to refine this and to know exactly field by field where this is. We've got no interest in missing anything at all. I was frankly, and this is just me, I was surprised to see that as much was accredited to the commercial fertilizer and less to manure. I know also there are other issues with manure that don't exist, but in terms of the problem we were studying, this was the best information that we had at the time.
Okay. We have another question. When you refer to the mandatory certification of applicators, can you define who an applicator would be?
Well, that would be up to the, that could be done in different ways. I believe the Ohio legislation is anybody who applies to 50 acres or greater is what I'm recalling. You might decide as legislators that you want to define that differently. We're not generally thinking of people who have a garden out back, but somebody who's got a commercial-sized operation. Of course, 50 acres is not huge, and many operations are much, much larger. And I know many farmers in the larger operations hire, they don't do their own applications anymore. They hire people, and in Ohio, as I said, in the next few years, those people will have to be certified.
Okay.
Because the truth is that there is extra being put on. If it weren't extra, it wouldn't be, or if it weren't put on frozen ground, it would be absorbed into the plants, which is, of course, the purpose of spending the money and the effort in the first place.
But then that definition and any requirements for applicators would not necessarily apply to people who over-apply fertilizer to lawns, for example.
That would be a separate thing. Michigan has legislation, I believe, that bans the sale of phosphates in lawn fertilizers with some exceptions. And Scott's, for instance, came out with a fertilizer, lawn fertilizers that to meet that market that doesn't have the phosphorus. If you're starting a new lawn, the Michigan law says you can add it because it's, you may be deficient in a new lawn, but in an old lawn, most of them are not deficient.
Okay. We have another question from Representative Paul Torkelson from Minnesota. What is the role of invasive species and or other fauna that live in the lake?
Well, in this particular case, as the scientists explained to us, and the scientists are still working on this. Forgive my non-scientific language here, but apparently the mussels that filter things don't absorb. They spit out the phosphorus, so they're absorbing the other things. They're spitting out the phosphorus, and the phosphorus is thereby accumulating. So they're changing the chemistry of the lake, and that makes this challenge that much greater. Without those invasive species, apparently, whatever level of phosphorus is in the lakes would not be creating quite as much algal blooms and toxics as you're getting with the current conditions. I hope that answers the question. And again, I keep referring people to this report because there's a lot in it that you and your staff will want to read. Okay. And there's also people at IJC who would be happy to, if you question the science or whatever. We're easy to reach. Our website's there. The people who will answer the questions. If you have information that we don't have, we want to hear it. As I said, this is a dynamic, ongoing dialogue.
Okay, and we do have on the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus website a link to the slides that you have and also the ones I'm showing, and that has your contact information, the housekeeping and about the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus slides. That has your contact information in it. Do you have time for one more question, Lana?
I do.
Okay, Wayne Howard has had his hand raised for quite some time, so Wayne, I'm opening up your line. We can hear you now.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Wayne Howard, co-chair of the U.S. Sierra Club Binational Great Lakes Committee. Lana, it appears that the, hi, how are you? It appears that the Upper Great Lakes plan would decrease the volume of Lake Erie. Wouldn't that exacerbate the Western Lake Erie algal problem?
I am not going to speak for IJC or as a scientist, which I am not. But one knows that concentrations as well as loads matter. Load is how much in the lake, and concentration, of course, is how much is in a particular place in the lake. So yes, concentrations make a difference.
Okay. I think.
But if you want, I'm not exactly. I'm not clear that there's a plan that would substantially change the volume of Lake Erie. If that's what you're saying, I'm perhaps missing something, Wayne.
Wayne, do you want to follow up? Wayne, would you like a follow up?
No.
Okay.
Thanks for answering my question.
Okay, thank you.
And we have one other question. It's off topic, but I'll go ahead and just mention the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus has been following the Ontario power generation proposal to build a deep geologic repository. A question came up about whether or not the IJC is going to be looking into that proposal. You don't have to answer that because it is off the topic we asked you to talk about, but I will mention the caucus will be addressing the DGR and other impacts of energy on the Great Lakes in a webinar later this spring.
At this time, the federal governments have not asked us to study it, and at this time, the Commission has not decided on its own to study that issue. Everything we do is binational, which is, of course, the strength of the IJC. So that's where we stand right now on that issue.
Okay. We need to move on in just a bit, but I wanted to ask you, Lana, do you want Dave Dempsey to say a few words?
I would ask Dave Dempsey always to say a few words, especially if he thinks that I've missed something or if one of the questions might have been answered more fulsomely.
Okay, Dave, I'm opening up your line. It looks like you are calling or you're using your microphone on your computer, so let's hope we don't get any feedback. Hold on just a second. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I'm a little bit on the spot here, but I think Lana covered the issues pretty comprehensively. I think I just would want to underscore that we have two products coming out that will enter into our LEAP 2 report. One is the economic study that Lana mentioned, and our Health Professionals Advisory Board is also studying the issue of cyanotoxins in drinking water, and we'll be recommending a level of safety for that in drinking water. So that's hopefully going to come out later this year. We're also going to be looking at some other aspects of the problem.
Okay, thank you. Well, will thank you, Lana, for your presentation. Representative Mason, are you there?
Thank you. I'm going to check off. Thank you, and thank you, Representative Mason. I appreciate your important work in this.
No, thank you, and thank you, Ms. Pollack, for your time. And I know you have to go for another call, but we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
With the time remaining, I'd like to share with all of you some of the information that we have about the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, talk a little bit about its mission, and what we hope will be our priorities in 2015 and 16. As some of you know, the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus is a binational and nonpartisan group of state and provincial lawmakers from the Great Lakes region, with members from all 8 U.S. states and both Canadian provinces. The organization really has 3 goals, the first of which is to facilitate regional exchange of ideas and information on the Great Lakes and issues around it. The second is to strengthen the role of state and provincial legislators in the policy-making process around the Great Lakes. And the third is to promote the restoration and protection of the Great Lakes. I have the privilege of chairing the caucus with my colleague, Michigan Senator Bohr, is the vice chair. He would be with us right now, but he is in session in Michigan, so understandably couldn't join us today. We had the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus's Executive Committee, which directs the organization's activities, and the other members of the committee are listed on your screen right now as well. The caucus was organized in 2003 with assistance from the Council of State Governments Midwestern Office. We're very grateful to the CSG Midwest for their staff support, and also to the Joyce Foundation, whose financial support has helped us develop into the premier regional forum for state and provincial legislators who are committed to restoring and protecting the Great Lakes. A little bit about the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus. We work very hard to help its members and rely really on all of the region's legislators to learn about Great Lakes issues and stay appraised of developments with regard to state, provincial, and federal legislation and programs that could affect the lakes. In addition to the webinars like we're doing today, we host Great Lakes policy workshops in state capitals, and we hold annual meetings that rotate throughout the 10 jurisdictions in the basin. We also have a quarterly newsletter, e-newsletter called Great Lakes News for Legislators, which just came out yesterday, by the way, and we maintain state and federal legislative trackers documenting water or lakes-related bills. We also advocate for the Great Lakes. For example, through caucus resolutions and letters from the Executive Committee on behalf of the organization, we give our members opportunities to sign on to letters on timely topics and to identify topics for letters on issues that are important to them. I'll talk more about our advocacy efforts in just a few minutes. If you want more information about the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, please visit our website, greatlakeslegislators.org. Recordings of our webinars can be a great resource, and you'll find them on the website and on CSG's Midwest YouTube channel. The caucus is now on Twitter, so I hope those of you who use Twitter will follow us on at GLLC Caucus. And also that caucus members will mention us when appropriate in tweets about Great Lakes issues that affect your jurisdiction. If there are legislators on the line who are not yet members of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, membership is open to all legislators from the 8 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces, in the Great Lakes region. There is no cost to become members, only benefits. So I highly encourage you to enroll today at the link you see on the screen. And if you're already a member, please consider reaching out to some of your colleagues to recommend that they join the organization as well. There will be many opportunities for legislators and their staff to take part in Great Lakes Legislative Caucus activities both this year and next. In 2015, our annual meeting will take place in Buffalo, New York on September 25th and 26th. Registration will be open in May, and we hope once again to be able to offer travel scholarships to Great Lakes Legislative Caucus members who need them. I'm very personally pleased that in 2016, the annual meeting will take place in Milwaukee, just a few miles outside of my district, which is the site of the first Great Legislative Caucus meeting. The 2016 meeting will take place on July 15th and 16th in conjunction with the annual meeting of the Midwest Legislative Conference of CSG. I mentioned that we host Great Lakes policy workshops. Our first one for this year will be in Wisconsin, will be for Wisconsin legislators, and that will be next week, February 25th from 3 to 5, here in our state capital. We have 3 speakers lined up who will address the economic impact of the Great Lakes, preventing the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species, and emerging contaminants like microbeads. The focus will be on workable policy solution legislators can take to address some of the critical problems facing the Great Lakes. There's no charge to attend the workshops or the reception that will follow. A workshop for Ohio legislators is being arranged for late April. We also hope to host one more workshop in a 3rd jurisdiction before the end of the spring, so if you are interested, please let us know. Our webinar series will continue next month with our annual update on legislation at the federal, state, and provincial level. We're going to poll caucus members to identify the best date for that webinar. I recognize it's difficult to do that in the midst of a legislative session and their busy schedules for even an hour-long webinar, but we do like having members attend the live events so that we can discuss as a group whether to take any action to follow up on a particular issue we learned about, either as an organization or as individual members joining together to co-sign letters advocating Imposition. And on that note, I want to let the members know that I've asked staff to draft a letter of support for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Act of 2015. The GLRI is the President's initiative to carry out the programs and specific projects to restore and protect the Great Lakes. Since its inception in 2010, the GLRI has depended on annual action by Congress to authorize and fund these activities. It began with a $475 million appropriation in fiscal year 2010, but that amount has hovered either at or close to $300 million ever since. This year, the President proposed a $50 million cut to $250 million, which is a concern to those of us who feel strongly that restoration projects should remain a high priority for the administration. The GLRI Act of 2015 would authorize the initiative and would fund it at least $300 million annually through the federal year 2020. The caucus has supported similar letters in the past and letters of support for legislation in the past, and I would hope that we would do it again this year. We'll take the appropriate steps to formalize the letter either as a caucus position or to circulate it among members as a sign-on letter. Watch for information on that to come out soon through email. Voicing support for the authorization of the GLRI is just the first of many actions I hope the caucus will take in the coming year to follow through on our goal of promoting the restoration and protection of the Great Lakes. In conjunction with our annual meeting, members will have the opportunity to submit resolutions for consideration. Throughout the year, though, if any GLLC members have issues they would like to bring to the attention of their colleagues in the Great Lakes Basin, please contact Lisa Hanairo for assistance. I value the many educational opportunities the GLLC makes available to members, but as much as possible, I'd like to see us take what we have learned and turn it into action to benefit the Great Lakes. And that's basically it. I'm really looking forward to working with everybody this year, and with that, I will hand it off to Lisa Hanairo.
Thank you, Representative Mason, and thank you to all our participants today. You can view any of these webinars at any time by visiting the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus website or CSG Midwest's YouTube channel at the addresses you see on the screen. I'll also put these links in the email messages that you'll all receive in follow-up to this webinar. To learn about upcoming Great Lakes Legislative Caucus events, including the Wisconsin workshop next week, please visit the website or follow us on Twitter. Finally, please take a minute to fill out the short survey that'll pop up as soon as we're done. We count on your feedback to help us improve our webinars and identify topics and speakers for future sessions. I hope you'll join us again and that you'll let your colleagues know about this helpful resource for staying up to date on issues that affect the Great Lakes. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day.